Welcome everyone to our annual lecture on animal rights law and policy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Professor Matilda Lansdowne Chair here at the faculty and also the Director of the Animals in Society Research Initiative. We would like to start off by acknowledging with respect that from within the Salish peoples and where the land university resides and whose profound relationships with the land continue to this day. As we've been discussing in our Animal Selection and Law seminar, welcome to the students in that class right here. We see a lot of connections between what we understand the devastation and current impact of settler quotas to be in Canada, beyond the human sphere as well. So I think the land acknowledgement is a moment to recall the Indigenous, non-human, affected, devastated by colonialism and their ongoing enmeshment in colonial, extractive, and ongoing practices, which is very much related to the talk that Professor Matilda Arvidsson will be giving today. I'm so happy to invite and see Dr. Arvidsson here at our law school. Her work is really well known in so many spheres. She is an associate professor at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, currently on research leave at Lund University in Sweden. Charming university town. Looking pretty cute as a button. I think that's what you first said to me, place to visit. Dr. Arvidsson is known for her work in artificial intelligence before people were talking about artificial intelligence. So law and technology and AI and other technologies, on gender violence and feminist legal theories, on the relationships of humans with non-humans, and really as a prominent sociology of law scholar in Europe and worldwide. She has multiple edited collections to her name, multiple editorial activities, for example, the Journal on Human Rights and Environment that she's just taken over, as well as serving on boards and well-known journals like Legal Studies and other ones. She is a recipient of many grants, too many to list, from the Swedish National Council, from Nordis, and other international agencies for her groundbreaking work. So today, with her talk on more than human relations, the non-human, the jurisprudence of gardens, Dr. Arvidsson will be inviting us to think about, in our world of animal law and animal rights, what might be the exclusions we're enacting when we only think about the one category of non-human and not think beyond. Certainly the number one question I receive when I talk about animals as well, how to think about plants and what are their interests, and recalling what we just said about the enmeshment of non-humans in gender systems of violence and colonial systems of violence. We have a wonderful opportunity to really give this attention in thinking about non-human life, the hierarchies we create, how we might think about a jurisprudence. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to you, Dr.
So thank you first so much to Professor Decker for inviting me here. Thank you all for coming along and for being willing to think together about gardens and about what jurisprudence is and can be. So I'm going to start by asking why gardens? So we'll stay with gardens throughout the talk. I will use it as an entry to think about human and more than human relations in law and jurisprudence, because gardens, they lend themselves very well for this analysis. So gardens, if we think about them, if we go there, they are emblematic of man's attempt to own the world, and to do so through conscious design, embodied work, language. All plants have a Latin name. We name them. Naming and place-taking, all of that we know from jurisprudence as the normative power of law. Gardens are at once material places and ideological constructs. One can find the animate as well as the inanimate dwellers of this earth here. The material, immaterial, the nature, culture, and the human, non-human. One can see how man, through normative practices, attempts to order the world in one space. And the garden becomes a miniature of this ordering practice, of how mankind imagines the world as knowable and governable. Gardens are at one and the same time there, present and performing, yet with very few examples to the contrary, they're quite absent from analysis of law and jurisprudence. So that's what we are doing here, bringing the garden into that material of analysis. So that's my attempt here, to bring that forth and to invite you to think through the garden. Because gardens is something that you already know. So I don't have to tell you what your gardens are, because they are intimate places to all of us. The invitation is to learn with and learn among trees and bugs and smells, even smells of petals as the gardens is worked on by machine, to learn through immersion, bodily immersions with the roots, the mycelium, the slugs, the wild grass, using a different perspective then and a different logic. And this is what I'm gonna bring through this talk, and this is the logic of humans as food. Because plants provide us with oxygen, they feed us, so that we eventually can become compost, nutritious and delicious part of the garden. So this is not to say in any sort of way that let's go and die, all of us, or but in any violent way, but to acknowledge that by changing the perspective from us ordering the world to being among in the garden, we can see ourselves and what we are and our relations in law jurisprudence quite differently. From being the top predator to being fed to become healthy, non-toxic, nutritious food ourselves. Okay, so from another perspective then as well. So why gardens? So I talk about gardens because I know them intimately. I know them because I lived with gardens. I know them all my life. I grew up on the countryside, weeding involuntarily as a child in my parents' vegetable and fruit and berries garden. I also worked in so many of law's institutions where I've come to gravitate towards the gardens. And I can already now say that I already visited the garden here at the university. I embodied the office of the law at one point. So before entering academia, I worked for a brief moment of time as a junior judge. And that experience fundamentally changed the way in which I think about law and jurisprudence. But that was also the starting point for me to think about the jurisprudence of gardens in more academic terms. So I'll come back to talk about that garden in a bit. I'm not, as you may well know, the first legal scholar or lawyer to think about gardens or to even write about gardens. There are plenty of lawyers who've been gardeners, thinking about gardens and writing about gardens before me. And so part of the talk today is that I'm going to take you through first some of the, just very briefly, the theory in which I use in order to just enter into this. So you come along for that. Then we're going to talk about lawyers thinking about gardens. So some examples that you know of, some older, some newer. Then we're going to go into a few different gardens. So gardens that you know quite well, and some of the gardens, historical gardens that I'll introduce you to. And we'll end with what a jurisprudence, gardens of a jurisprudence of justice or multitude is and can be. So envisioning what a better practice for law and jurisprudence may be for us. So starting with a bit of theory then. I come from, so I'm not the only post-human scholar in here. Manisha has done extensive work in this field, and I'm indebted to her work and many others. But just to give us all sort of a bit of background, critical post-humanist, especially the feminist one that Rosie Braidotti works with, it builds on a Spinozian understanding of matter as fundamentally relational. So this introduces distinguish between power and power, which in Latin becomes potestas, so the power as domination or institutional authority, and on the other hand, potentia, power as immanent capacity to act and be effective. And this is the creative kind of power that is central, especially in Braidotti's post-human feminist work. It is an affirmative and joyous relational force that enables interspecies, intergenerational becoming, rather than the hierarchical separation that Manisha talked about in the introduction. It focused on the mutual emergence of human and non-human life and the material conditions of planetary existence. So very much related to post-human theory is this other set of theory that I found helpful for thinking about gardens, and that's inhuman theory. So inhuman theory, for those of you who are not familiar with this is a field, Catherine Yusuf, for example, is one of the key scholars, that draws on critical geology, but also decolonial and race theory. And it examines the geosocial conjoined material praxis of colonial terra and subject forming coming together. So the idea is very much in the ground, in the geology and the social political spacing that is a continuous colonial practice also today. So the extractivism and planetary extinction of the Anthropocene are not random when we think through inhuman theory, but traceable to colonial hierarchies of human, subhuman, and inhuman. So inhuman being the geological materials that are not even subhuman. They don't even have that status of being sub, right? So the inhuman becomes the earth, minerals, matter, but also thinking through this theory, anything can, when we analyze it, be understood in the hierarchy as not even meeting the threshold of human in this hierarchy, thus the inhuman. I'll just give you two very quick examples. So AI is actually a very good example when thinking through both post-humanism and inhuman theory. So AI is often it appears as very invisible and therefore hard to grasp what the material extension of it is. It's not only the invisible labor that goes into AI, and not only the geological effects of mining the rare metals that are needed, but the reproduction of colonial hierarchies that comes with the increasing use of AI. Those whose needs are met by AI, and those whose labor become invisible, and those who are reduced to extracted matter, they come, if we map this on to colonial history, from very similar places. So we, again, have this repetition or ongoing hierarchies that we know from colonialism. The other example that I just want to mention is the termites. So this lovely creature, which was once seen as, or still today, seen as a pest, therefore extermination, is now instead valued because of its gut enzyme. So the gut enzyme of the termite, you can extract it for commercial purposes because, of course, it eats wood. That's what it does. It also means that whatever enzyme that can process wood into a liquid that we can do paper or any other project for, that's something to extract for commercial value, right? Because that, of course, is the goal for our lives, to extract in order to become richer and to, yet again, subjugate those who are not even subhuman, not human, not even others. It's just matter, inhuman matter. So both from the post-humanist and the inhuman theory, we sort of come to the garden and we reject the human as the center and the telos of the jurisprudence that we bring with us. Both these theories, they insist on more law or more of the same law. So saying, if we just add another right, just another right for plants, let's give trees rights, let's give the termite a legal standing. So from this perspective, what is needed instead is not more of the same, but an ontological reorientation, confronting the colonial racist, gender, speciesist violence, and repositioning the human as among the many differences in a multitude of bodies and entities, as food and as feeding. So I'll take you to lawyers thinking about gardens. And let's start with Gary Simpson. So some of you know Gary Simpson well, may know his work. And this is one of his latest, I think the latest book, The Sentimental Life of International Law, sporting this lovely flower on the pattern. So he writes in his recent book on mid-19th century to early 20th century international lawyers forming international law. So this formative time and process in which modern international law emerged. And he writes in the chapter on gardening. Gardening has a double plot, so to speak, and I'm quoting. At once both Edenic, wild and anarchic, but also suburban, aristocratic, manicured and stately, end of quote. So Simpson is analyzing gardens as a metaphor for the making of modern international law. And gardens as made in particular styles in which nature and the natural order becomes civilized. So this is echoing international law. If you remember your international law class, this is what international law has been arguing all along. Let's civilize the world through law and order. So we may even recall Matti Koskiniemi's book, The Gender Civilizers of Nation. And this is the same terminology that comes back through the gardening, and the making of international law. So Simpson's words, they are really on gardening and gardening activities. They're really packed with meanings of legal history. He captures how the work of lawyers are mirrored by garden designs and garden works. And these simultaneously, and perhaps unwittingly, are descriptions of the speciesist domination through which gardens are made to matter, through a human positionality as part of human care and history, and for humans, or at least for some humans, because we know gardens are often fenced, fencing off and fencing in. So gardens as Edenic, wild and anarchic, both as suburban, aristocratic, manicured and stately in Simpson's work, speaks of human culture, human history, ideology and domination over everything living and inanimate. So gardens in Simpson's analysis, they invite us to consider how mankind name that which is considered wild, and in contrast, that which is considered civilized, and how suburban living, aristocratic rule, and statehood all comes with conventions and modes of pursuing and displaying human domination and control over nature, over plants and animals, their access to water, nutrition, air, sun, their reproduction, their families and names all made in Latin, their purpose and their place in the garden. Let's switch over to someone else, Peter Goodrich. So Goodrich, he speaks of the origin of law, but this is actually the garden. So he says that the state of origin, law's origin, that is where so this is where he starts his analysis. He identifies law's origin in the closure or enclosure, finding the Latin root claudio to indicate close, enclosure, end, and death, the life of law beginning with death. The root etymology of garden leads us similarly to a fence defending the limits of an enclosure. The old English word for garden, garret, or garret, means fence. Over time, garret developed into modern English yard or yard, a fenced-in plot of land. The Indo-European root for garden is ger, meaning fence, and gort, meaning enclosure. Both the origin of law and the garden thus takes us to a fence, an enclosure of land, and the beginning and end of both life and death. This brings us to our next lawyer thinking about garden, and this is Locke. So if we move on to John Locke, we can see that the close relation between colonialism, law, and gardens becomes an even more central theme because, and I quote, colony is a word etymologically derived from the Latin of inhabits, till, and cultivate. This is an explicit reference to the cultivation of land, to inhabits and till, such as Locke describes it, and how he describes how private ownership over land emerges. So he says, and I quote, by subduing, tilling, and sowing, and thus improving the land, annexing it to something that is your own property. So the working of the body with the land with the body. That's how property and title to land emerges. So legal title of a land, colonial and otherwise, emerges in this way, says law. So colonialism is gardening on a planetary scale. And the geopolitical ramifications of this, if we think within new theory, Yusuf is quite clear. The root of colonialism, to inhabit it and cultivate, are basic practices of gardens. Moreover, and I jump to the next set of scholars, so Kojo Koram and Oscar Guardiola Riviera, they have shown in their work on drugs, so plant-based drugs, that plant life has been a central concern of international law and the concern of subjugation and subaltern subjugation in law for the longest of time. The inhuman describes, they argue, colonized and racial peoples of the global south, the culture, and their plants. All of this becomes materials for extraction and domination through legal control and prohibition. And this again recalls how inhuman theory locates these geologies and geographies. Think only of the coca plants and the peyote cactus. These are central plants. These are plants that are really central to indigenous cultures, but also heavily guarded, restricted, and regulated by law. Now, and we don't find them in botanical gardens anywhere. So read me right on this. I'm not saying let's have free drugs for everyone. That's not what I'm saying. But instead, I'm pointing to how plant life is part of a well-known colonial legal practice and jurisprudence of control, domination of the wild, uncivilized, and that which must be ordered by us, right? So I'll take you on to the next slide. And now we move into Sweden. We move into a couple of different gardens that I want to invite you to think together with me. So what you see up here is the photo of the childhood home of a Swedish man called Hans Thurén. It is also the Sollefteå District Court of northern Sweden. It is a photo that comes from Thurén's personal family photo album, and below it, it is scribbled in a childish handwriting, as you see here. It says, "Här bor jag," or "I live here." So from the 1850s, Swedish district courts housed and hosted, when possible, vegetable gardens and gardens for leisure. The gardens were kept as a means to cater for the judges during the periodical sessions of the courts. Now, think again, this is a remote location in the northern parts of Sweden. Courts were not held every day. They were held in sessions, and the judges came in for the sessions. The gardens held vegetables and fruits. Sometimes there were a few hens or a pig, and they provided food for the court personnel, meaning the judges, but also the janitor and the housekeeper who lived on site with their families. So the gardens became playgrounds for their children, lived spaces of law. They were places of leisure, love, and desire after long days of work. Among the kales and the carrots, beans and potatoes, both love and law was practiced and considered. So I'll move to the court where I served. So this too is a Swedish district court. So sometimes in the 1930s, it was no longer a common practice that families lived on site at the district courts. This also meant that there was a professionalization, the courts became fewer, they became centralized, but gardens remained a feature of these spaces of law. Instead of kale and carrots, they were designed to convey authority. So in 2004-06, this was my workplace, the District Court of Lund in southern Sweden. It was designed in 1956, and it was inspired by Le Corbusier. And you may know that Corbusier was this famous French architect. He was also a main figure in designing the UN headquarters in New York. So we have architectures and architects who do not only sort of design these buildings because they are needed, but to represent a particular idea and ideology of the law. But these architectural designs, of course, also comes with gardens. So these are the gardens. This is the official garden, and this is the office garden. Now, two very different gardens. So I also have to say that I found it really, really difficult to embody the legal office. I found it even unbearable. I came straight out of law school and had a very romanticized idea about what law is and can be. Like many of you, I had a strong commitment to justice, and I envisioned myself being a judge committed to those causes. I found embodying the office of law being a mundane, everyday practice of keeping to the orders of the workplace, of doing as one should, and to practice law in ways that I know I was required to do, but emphatically felt was unjust. So what do you do when you are the face and the voice and your name is signed on court cases that you cannot live with are made in your name? I sought out the gardens. So I wanted out of this. I've tried to find a way. I wandered the garden, both the official garden and the office garden. It was multi-directed, multi-species, and it gave some sort of material guidance, some sort of grounding. I often gazed out over the gardens when I was sitting in my office or when I was sitting behind the bench presiding over cases. If I was in the garden, I could hear the noise of traffic outside, the occasional bird singing, and when inside, I could imagine it. So was there a gardener at this court? This was a question I arrived at much later. I don't know. I never saw one because I thought about law and my own embodiment of it. I didn't really think about the fact that these artificial spaces of life did not provide soil, rich soil enough, nutrition enough, and water enough for the plants to survive. Someone must have entered this garden with care to make sure that life went on. Now I'll take you to the next garden, which is the Peace Palace in The Hague. So this is the International Court. Can you live in those gardens? Yes, says the gardener of the Peace Palace. He's actually appearing here in person. So I just wanted to show you, this is the design of the garden. This is how it looks. And here we have the gardener. So we stay with him. Can you live in Law's Gardens? Yes, says Dolph van Endenburg. Apologies if I don't pronounce it correctly. Who, since 1987, lives together with his family on the premises of the Peace Palace. At first, I quote here from this article, at first, he says, the Peace Palace and its garden looked magical. You came to work in a place, but it was all new to me and my wife, Timothy, who was pregnant at the time. This was when security and night shifts were part and parcel of the job of the gardener. We lived on the property with 3 other families. End of quote. So he still lives with his wife, and this was interview was done in 2021. So I assume that he still lives there at the premises. They are the only remaining human residents, but as the article tells us, they live there together with golden carps in the large pond, foxes, roe deers that wander into the garden, falcons that flies over, and owls and kingfishers, but also European polecats. And, I quote, regular cats who are also often thrown over the wall from the outside into the garden. And on top of that, we have 2 pigs, says the gardener. Now, the design of the Peace Palace Gardens was awarded through an international competition. This is often how gardens are designed, architectural features, both buildings and gardens. It went to British landscape architect Thomas Mawson. He's a well-known garden architect. And his philosophy was characterized by an aim to integrate the architecture of the court with its garden. So this is called the Peace Palace. This is the vision of international law that the court sort of wanted to convey. So this became the idea for the garden as well. The botanical composition serves this symbolic manifestation of peace-bringing ideals that Mawson saw as reflective of international law, the court and its gardens. He intentionally omitted flora with thorns, prioritizing species with small foliage and to optimize light penetration and foster an atmosphere of transparency. Now, do we recognize this as lawyers? Transparency. With all of this, Mawson created an acoustic and visual buffer from the urban environment in which the Peace Palace actually is situated in The Hague. It's a heavily trafficked intersection just outside the walls, thus effectively establishing a secluded oasis of tranquility. Law as a secluded oasis of tranquility. That this is a garden that is an example of the romantic imagination of what law and jurisprudence can be. Let's exclude the thorny bushes from our garden, and peace arrives. Let's create artificial buffers around the Garden of Eden, and the others are kept at bay, except for the cats that are thrown over, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of architectural envisionment that we have of this garden. Now I'll take you to the last example that I wanted to bring to you. So you may recognize this. So I wanted to say something before we go to the joyous imagination and practice of what a jurisprudence of multitudes can be. The botanical garden. Sorry, we've all been there. Multiple times in multiple locations. And we know that botanical gardens often look very, very similar, regardless of where we are in the world. So botanical gardens emerged historically from the dedication to explore, document, and produce scientific knowledge about plants and plant life, even the sexual, gendered life of plants. The scientific classifications of plants by the Swedish botanist Carolus Linnaeus in the mid-late 16th century introduced a shift in popularity, and it spurred a spread of botanical sciences, botany, and botanic gardens across especially the Western world, Northwest world. The non-West served as the object of this expanding knowledge. Exotic plants could be discovered, extracted, and brought back home, where they became collected plant specimens, categorized in the emerging practice of botany and law, because these are practices that emerged very much in the same time as international law emerged and became established. So keeping plants in botanic gardens became a means for the botanists to display and educate, to showcase exotic specimens to the general public once botanic gardens became public spaces in the 19th century. So Jessie Homan, who's an Australian legal scholar, she brings forth the botanical garden as, and I quote, part of international law's material structure, underpinning and sustaining its spread across the globe and its continuous material and ideological projects. And thus, and in a quote, thus, and invoking Goodrich, who we heard earlier, for this analysis, international law as botanical garden is an enclosed space where international law aims, legal aims and institutions are made to flourish and where they grow. This, at least in my analysis, is a dystopian image of what international law as a project of documentation and collection of life, of living plants for the purpose of research, conservation, and display and education is and can be. It is there, but it is not all that law is or can mean. When Homan says, and I quote, that botanical gardens remain central to an international conservation and research agenda that seeks to respond to climate change, biodiversity loss, and other environmental challenges, end of quote. This is true, and she reminds us of what law is trying to achieve. But it also reminds us of the colonial impetus, both past and present, of seeking to remedy our own complicity in past atrocities by making them central to the remedies we offer as part of international law or law more general. So whereas the botanical garden, however lovely it is, or isn't, it may be representative of global historical trajectories of law, showcasing specimens with the Latin names and acting to conserve flora for future purposes. It is a garden that sustains the roots of law's colonial enterprise, its speciesism, its racism, its impulse to categorize, to name, to uproot, and to govern. Now, what could we do? If it was up to me, and it is in a way, it is up to you as well. So if it was insofar that it's up to me, I would organize Law's Garden as a community garden where staff would practice an everyday mutual care of non-hierarchical collaboration together with the community dwelling wherever law is present. Human and non-humans, flora of any kind, and all other others, which include stones, volcanoes, buckets, and cars, because they are all part of this world. Or a garden of buoyant architecture for law, a water-wise garden, one worthy of hydro-justice, far from the ornamental botanic gardens showcasing specimen for spectators to marvel at. So what does this mean in practice? What kind of law would it mean, and what kind of jurisprudence of garden? It is a garden of multitudes. It is a jurisprudence of gardens that I envision that means both taking and giving space, of withdrawing and being among organic lives and abiotic entities. And this is invoking Andreas Philopoulos Michalopoulos' spatial justice theory and hydro-justice theory. It is also invoking Braidotti's post-human feminism and the emphasis of potentia, the splendid joy of being with, of inhaling the oxygen and preparing to decompose, of knowing our nutritious value as part of a body larger than ourselves, of interspecies relations of care and commitment, because as Donna Haraway puts it, no species, not even our own arrogant one, pretending to be good individuals in so-called modern Western scripts, acts alone. Assemblages of organic species and abiotic actors make history, the evolutionary kinds and the other kinds too. End of quote. So can we think of ourselves in these kinds of garden? In my garden, garden of jurisprudence, I grow vegetables wherever this can be done. I grow edibles because vegetables feed the starving. Why pursue non-edibles and non-livable materializations of law in its architectures and designs? Why indeed? Much can be done with very limited means. So instead of saying, what can I do? I can do much. Why don't we build the botanical garden here in Victoria in recognition of the settler colonialism through which Canada came into existence? Why not turn it into a buoyant architecture? Necessarily so because water levels are rising. Why not make Lulu's gardens edible and why not overcome racist speciesism and replace it with an all-encompassing design of redistribution, equality, and inclusion in practice? If the Peace Palace in The Hague could house a gardener, and if the district court in northern Sweden, Sollefteå, could house the Thorén family, why cannot Lo's garden house more? Not only humans, not only bugs, not only thorny bushes, but why not tents? Because as we know, the only tents that international law recognizes are those of refugee camps far, far away from international law's headquarters. These are headquarters with gardens. So why not make them into refugee camps? Why indeed not? So to realize the jurisprudence of garden for this purpose, let's begin at the roots and how the structural underpinnings of law and gardens never change unless we continuously readdress and examine them through an understanding. And again, I invite the post-human feminist and the human perspective as an ontological shift, but also as a practice, as a deeply embodied practice. It may actually be that I have already planted some seeds here and there. If you were to go to the Peace Palace and wander the gardens, you may see things growing that are out of place, or perhaps exactly where they should be. So if you want to join this effort, you will find me in the kale garden. You will find me with a witchgrass. I will be working, as usual, towards Law's gardens becoming havens of mutual care. Justice not as ornaments, but also as the actual realization of fundamental, concrete, material, embodied aims of law and justice for all, also those who eat us. Not just for some, not just for humans, not just for non-human animals, but for all. And I'll end with the witchgrass, because as Louise Glück writes in her beautiful poem, The Witchgrass, her collection, The Wild Iris in 1992, and this is the last stanza of the poem. I don't need your praise to survive. I was here first. Before you were here, before you even planted a garden, and I'll be here when only the sun and the moon are left, and the sea and the wide field. I will constitute the field. Thank you.
Dr. Arvidsson, thank you so much. And you just delivered such a beautifully crafted, but such capacious and richly textured talk. And on this last one about the plant communication, really drawing up what we were all discussing and listening to, I would say the normative typical response in the animal law community in terms of Anglo circles and continental circles is to keep a division between plants and animals in terms of our moral regard on the ground of sentience, right? But as we know more, right, so again, we're dependent on the silence and these kind of colonial type of knowledge to teach us more about plants. And the question comes up, are they sentient? What other non-human life form is sentient? And we know that other cultures, we can take our Canadian example of many indigenous cultures thinking of many types of non-human life forms as sentient, right? Even mountains and rocks are sentient. Then what does that do to our legal and moral imagination? So it's an open question that we'll keep on thinking about. And thank you so much for the beautiful, it just lifted my heart when I saw this opening slide as well, and the beautiful talk. Please join me and thank you, Dr. Arvidsson.